Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked on Wolves. Today on the show, I want to talk a little bit about the All-NBA race. There's been a lot of talk about could Karl-Anthony Towns crack the second team All-NBA this year. I want to talk just a little bit about that. Then I want to get into the most likely potential playoff matchup for the Timberwolves, which of course is the LA Clippers, who are currently sitting 8th, 6 games behind the Wolves in 7. And then I want to look at Wolves-Mavs Friday night, a rematch of Monday's exciting game in Dallas. We're going to cover it all here today on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked on Wolves.
You are Locked on Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Locked on Wolves. This is the Locked on Wolves podcast, of course, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked on Wolves. I'm also the editor of Dunking with Wolves, the Timberwolves site and the Fansided Network. Today's episode is brought to you by NBA Top Shot. NBA Top Shot is the future of being an NBA fan. Own officially licensed rare NFTs of the greatest moments from NBA history. Sign up today at lockedon.nbatopshot.com. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend and happy Timberwolves game day. We're going to talk all about Wolves-Mavs later in the show, tonight's matchup, as well as Cat in the All-NBA race and the Timberwolves' most likely playoff matchup against the LA Clippers here. I don't know. Man, we're only like 3 weeks away from the playoffs. We're going to talk about all that today in the show. Thank you for making Locked on Wolves your first listen each and every day. Locked on Wolves is free and available everywhere that you can get podcasts, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey. You can find this show anywhere. You can also follow on Twitter at LockedOnTWolves. Don't forget the T. And my account is at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. All right, so I want to start the show today by talking about the case for Karl-Anthony Towns as second All-NBA. There's been a lot of talk about this lately. This is the time of year when everybody starts to talk about their All-NBA teams. Of course, regular season taken into account, no playoffs. So makes sense to talk about it. This was discussed recently on Zach Lowe's podcast, the Low Post podcast over at ESPN. He had on Kevin Arnowitz. They talked about this. The Timberwolves, on the Timberwolves broadcast of the day, Jim Peterson, the fantastic Jim Peterson, covered this a little bit as well. I mean, the conversation is, right, 3 months ago it was, will Towns make, or even 2 months ago, will Towns make an All-NBA team? Now it's kind of a foregone conclusion. He should at least be third team All-NBA. And if he's not, I don't know what we're doing with the award, and let's just not do it anymore, I guess. Right? I mean, like, he has to be at least third team All-NBA, right? Obviously, there's when he signs his next contract extension, he makes more money because of being All-NBA. So it's really important to him that he does. Like, he'll literally make very likely tens of millions more by being All-NBA versus not being All-NBA with the way that the new Supermax and Max contracts are structured. So it's very important that he at least makes third team All-NBA. Now the question is, can he make second team All-NBA? I think it's kind of a consensus. Nikola Jokic is the best center and arguably the best player in the league. He may win a second consecutive MVP. I think he should. I mean, again, briefly, this isn't case for Nikola Jokic to make MVP podcast, but I said this the other day. I mean, no Jamal Murray all season, no Michael Porter Jr. in a long time, and I mean, look at the rest of that roster. Like, it's fine, and Denver's been one of the deeper rosters in the league the last few years. But it's not even as good as what Karl-Anthony Towns has to work with. It's not particularly close. Jokic is just really good. I mean, I think he should win MVP. Now, the other guy that keeps getting mentioned for MVP is Joel Embiid. And now I think Giannis should still be in that conversation too, by the way. But the dominance of Joel Embiid earlier this season, and I think also the fact that Giannis just won the award 2 years ago, and Embiid's never won, people would rather talk about Embiid, and that's fine. I'm not going to talk about Giannis on this podcast either. So Embiid would be the other one. Now, of course, they're both centers. So then what do you do with those two? Do you put Jokic on first team? Do you put Embiid on second team? The argument that some, including Zach Lowe at ESPN, have been making is what does the All-Star game do now? Instead of center, power forward, small forward, shooting guard, point guard, it's front court, back court. Or it's front court. I guess it is. It's front court and it's back court. Does that make more sense for the All-NBA teams? Should we penalize Embiid? I mean, and for the sake of argument, I'm not saying for sure these are the two best players in the league, but if you buy that the top two MVP candidates, do you penalize Embiid for playing the same position as the best candidate or the best MVP candidate or the best player in the league, arguably, in Jokic. Should that mean you bump him to second team All-NBA just because he happens to play the same position? Because now you're basically saying there's 5 players that are better than him. So I understand the argument to put both Jokic and Embiid on the first team. But if you do that, now who's on your second team? It has to be Karl-Anthony Towns. Who are the other? Rudy Gobert is the only other candidate really that you could realistically put there. You look at some of the other guys that could be in that conversation. DeAndre Ayton, Bam Adebayo, probably not quite. Although, now we start getting into how are you valuing defense? How are we measuring defense? I guess is maybe a better way to say that. But why not Karl-Anthony Towns' second team? Given how well the Wolves have played, given the way Karl-Anthony Towns has navigated this season, all the advanced metrics would suggest that he should be in that category. You go to win shares, Towns is 5th in the league in win shares. Win shares is also, all these alleged catch-all metrics and advanced stats are a little bit flawed in some way, right? Win shares overvalues rebounds. Rudy Gobert is 4th in win shares, which is only 1 spot ahead of Karl-Anthony Towns. He's got a 25% rebound rate, which is crazy, sure. But he doesn't do much else besides block shots and grab rebounds. I know that Rudy Gobert is a good player. I'm not at all suggesting he's not. But Rudy Gobert has a 5% assist rate. He has a 1% steal rate, which, by the way, if you think that doesn't matter, it's extremely low. In fact, if you look at the top 25 players in win shares in the league this season, there's only one player with a lower steal rate than Rudy Gobert in the top 25. And remember, win shares overvalues rebounds. It overvalues block shots. Basically, it weights centers much better. And, in the top 25, it's got Clint Capella, DeAndre Ayton, Dwight Powell, Domantas Sabonis, Mitchell Robinson, Jarrett Allen, Robert Williams of the Celtics. All these guys are on this top 25 win shares list because of how it values centers, and they all have better steal rates than Rudy Gobert. Now, Gobert's protecting the rim. He's not out on the perimeter doing the same things that these guys are. But still, the only thing he's really got going for him is the rebound rate and the block rate, and we know he has a fantastic field goal percentage, but offensively he's very limited and does nothing like what Karl-Anthony Towns does for the Timberwolves. So Gobert is the only real competition, and I may get a little bit more into this comparison later as if this argument heats up. Right now, I don't think it's really an argument. Whether it's Towns to the second team and Gobert to the third team, or if the consensus is Jokic first team and Embiid second team, fine. Towns has to be third team, and Gobert can't be on the list then. I don't think there's really much of an argument to say that Gobert's had a better season than Karl-Anthony Towns. We could look at ESPN Real Plus Minus like we did the other day. Similar story there. Karl-Anthony Towns is 9th in Real Plus Minus RPM wins at ESPN. Rudy Gobert is 15th. His offensive RPM is just a 0.11. There's only 3 players in the top 25 in ESPN RPM wins that have a lower offensive RPM than Rudy Gobert. One is Mikal Bridges of the Phoenix Suns. One is Jaren Jackson Jr. of Memphis. And then, so I guess 3 players. And then the other one would be Nikola Vucevic of the Bulls. Otherwise, again, the 0.11 offensive RPM, obviously he's fantastic defensively. I get that. But may I also point out, again, this is getting pretty in the weeds now, Gobert doesn't really guard Karl-Anthony Towns anymore anyway. If your best defensive player or the player who you think is All-NBA, you being apparently this straw man or Jazz fans or whoever believes that Rudy Gobert should be over Karl-Anthony Towns as All-NBA, if he's not guarding the opposing center, then why do we think he's one of the best defensive centers in the league? Why do we think he should be third team All-NBA? Obviously, he's an incredible defensive player, and I shouldn't belittle that. But I think the lack of offensive game should completely weight the All-NBA argument for Rudy Gobert. I think we should be careful with suggesting he's had a better season than Karl-Anthony Towns simply because he grabs a lot of rebounds, blocks a lot of shots, can impact the game in the paint in a very big way. But Karl-Anthony Towns impacts the game more offensively than Gobert does defensively. Teams have to literally game plan their entire game around Karl-Anthony Towns defensively, and he's improved himself on defense. Obviously, nowhere near in the same stratosphere as Rudy Gobert. But the fact that he's now a marginal plus, he's an okay defender now, on top of being an otherworldly offensive player. We have to take that into consideration as well. So all that to say, I do want to revisit this. I do want to build this out a little bit more and talk more specifically about Gobert versus Towns if it comes down to second team or third team or no team for both of these guys, because I think this will be an interesting debate as we move closer to the end of the regular season with just a dozen, or I guess less than a dozen games left. Okay, next, I want to talk a little bit about the Clippers, the Wolves' most likely first round, or I guess play-in matchup for the Timberwolves. So we're going to do that next. We'll close the show with Wolves-Mavs conversation. First of all, let's talk about our friends over at BetOnline. It's that time of the year again. College basketball's tournament is well underway. We're now in the round of 16, second slate of games today. Some exciting ones on Thursday. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your sports betting needs and info. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. For your next listen, be sure to check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every NBA game with analysis from our local experts. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. It's the best way to get caught up on the previous night's NBA action. It's better than perusing the box scores, scrolling Twitter, watching the highlight shows, watching the debate shows, even worse. Whatever your choice of catching up on the night before, especially if you're watching the Wolves, right? If I'm watching the Wolves game, I'm plugged into that. I'm not paying nearly as much attention to the rest of the league. Get caught up. Listen to Locked On Now. It's the best way to do it. You'll get more than just box score info from the Locked On experts. Okay, let's talk about Wolves Clippers a little bit. So the Timberwolves haven't played the Clippers in a hot minute. It's been they played them twice, like consecutively in early November. They haven't seen the Clippers since January 4th. The first three times this season, it was bad. The Timberwolves were beat by double digits by the Clippers in all three games. The first one was way back in early November. Well, I guess let's set this up a little bit more. So the Clippers are by far the Timberwolves' most likely playoff matchup. Why? Well, they're 6 games behind Minnesota. Minnesota's in 7th. The Clippers are in 8th. They're 6 games behind the Timberwolves. The Wolves are currently a game behind the Nuggets. So obviously with 11 games left, the Wolves have a legit shot at catching the Nuggets still. They play Denver one more time. They have the ability to gain that tiebreaker, which effectively would then make them ahead of the Nuggets if they were to win that game. Well, I guess there's a couple games before then to decide whether or not the Wolves are actually, whether we're still within a game when they play the Nuggets. But they could win that tiebreaker. They're within a game of Denver. It's definitely possible the Wolves could end up in the 6th spot. However, their most likely playoff matchup, and this has been the case for a while now because these teams haven't moved, the Clippers have really struggled of late, is the LA Clippers. It's a weird matchup for the Timberwolves for a couple of reasons. One, they haven't played them since early January. So if they do play them in the play-in, it's going to be 3+ months removed. So we're talking like 13, 14 weeks since the last time that they played the LA Clippers. The Clippers obviously haven't had Kawhi Leonard all year. They haven't had Paul George in a really long time. The first time the Wolves took on the Clippers this year, way back in early November, Paul George went off against the Wolves. He scored 32 points, had 8 assists, 6 rebounds, shot 11 of 18, and Reggie Jackson had 29, 8 and 5, almost identical lines for those guys in a blowout win for the Clippers in Minnesota. And then the Wolves took on the Clippers again in their very next game and only scored 84 points, lost by 20 to the Clippers, losing consecutive games to LA. The Timberwolves at the time, they still had their full complement of guys. D'Angelo Russell missed this game. I think he had it was either the quad or the ankle. I think it was a quad. Towns had 28 and 7, but he turned it over 6 times, had 5 fouls in the game. Anthony Edwards shot just 7 of 22. And the Wolves didn't really get help from anyone else. Malik Beasley had 18 off the bench in a high-volume performance, 6 of 16 on 3-point shots in that game for Malik Beasley. But the Wolves lost their first game to the Clippers by 11. They lost the next night out, the next game to the Clippers by 20. And again, in that game, Paul George went for 21, 10, and 6, 3 steals. He shot just 4 of 20 from the field. Do you remember this game? Paul George shot, he was 0 of 7 from outside the arc. and had 6 turnovers, but he got to the line 14 times and ended up with a 21-10-6 with 3 steals line against the Wolves. So they lost both those games badly to the Clippers. Ivica Zubac gave Karl-Anthony Towns some fits. Towns again struggled with foul trouble in both of those games, I believe, or I guess just one of them. The first game he didn't, but he had just 18 and 11. And then the next time out against the Clippers, which was mid-November, so they played them 3 times in the span of less than 2 weeks. They lost by 27 to LA. So 3 consecutive double-digit losses to LA. At this point, we were questioning what the Wolves were even about this season. They were 4-8 after this loss. And again, lost 129 to 102. Towns had only 8 points and 8 rebounds in this game in 31 minutes. He wasn't in foul trouble either. He was 0 of 5 outside the arc, shot just 3 of 11 from the field, attempted only 3 free throws. D'Angelo Russell also struggled. Anthony Edwards struggled. None of these guys shot the ball well in the game, and the Wolves were just completely outclassed. They at halftime were down 70 to 43. They were down 27 at halftime to the Clippers and lost by 27. So at that point in the season, and by the way, Paul George was at this point still playing. This was before his injury. He had 23, 9, and 4 in this game. And again, Reggie Jackson, 21. This is the point in the season when the Wolves were really struggling against opposing backcourts that could score. They obviously still do to some extent, but they've improved drastically. But that was their foil early in the season defensively when the Wolves' defensive unit was hovering around top 10 for a long time. The Clippers and teams with dynamic backcourts were really the biggest challenge for the Timberwolves. Then the Wolves took on the Clippers again in January. At this point, the landscape had changed. This was January 4th, and the Clippers did not have Paul George available. Obviously, still not Kawhi Leonard. So you're talking about a team that looks a lot like the Clippers team we're seeing now. A lot of younger guys coming off the bench for this team that are forced into rotation minutes. The Timberwolves in this matchup, this was still when Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell were still on the COVID list. So Anthony Edwards had 28 in this game. Fantastic performance in early January. 11 of 17 shooting, made 5 threes on 10 attempts. Malik Beasley was in the starting lineup because the absence of D'Angelo Russell and the absence of Karl-Anthony Towns meant that Naz Reid started. He had 13 and 6 in this game. Jaden McDaniels came off the bench and had 18 points. Taurean Prince had 17 off the bench. And this was a relatively easy Timberwolves win. They were up 18 at halftime and won the game by, you guessed it, by 18. So basically, this shouldn't be a surprise. I'm not breaking any news here. The Clippers with Paul George were a terrible matchup for the Timberwolves. They really struggled to contain Paul George, whether it was Jaden McDaniels or Josh Okogie received some run towards the beginning of the season. The Wolves could not slow down Paul George. Now, Paul George isn't playing for the Clippers right now. Obviously, neither is Kawhi Leonard. Paul George just started to practice again. Who knows? Maybe he returns soon. But you look at the Clippers. They had a little 5-game winning streak right after the All-Star break or right around the All-Star break. Since then, they've gone 2-7 in their last 9. Currently, they're on a 4-game losing streak. They play the 76ers on Friday night on the 4-game losing streak. They lost to the Nuggets on Wednesday, which would have been better had they beaten the Nuggets. But at any rate, they lost to the Nuggets on Wednesday. They've played a tough schedule of late. They've also lost the Raptors, the Cavs, the Hawks, the Warriors, the Knicks. That's all mixed in there. They beat the Pistons and the Wizards. So they're still exactly where you'd think they would be without Paul George. They're a fringe playoff team. Still a tough matchup for the Wolves if Paul George plays. Even if he doesn't, the Wolves are going to struggle with Reggie Jackson. They just are. And Terrence Mann has played well for them in stretches. And of course, former University of Minnesota Golden Gopher and Minnesota native Amir Coffey is now a big part of their rotation, has been starting for them. They traded for Robert Covington back at the trade deadline. The Wolves also struggled to slow down, like Luke Kennard, guys that are knockdown 3-point shooters. The Wolves still at times struggle to defend the 3-point arc. All that to say, it's far from a walk in the park for the Wolves to potentially beat the Clippers in a play-in game. However, if Paul George doesn't make it back, obviously a very winnable game for Minnesota. Reggie Jackson is going to be a challenge. We'll talk more about the specific matchup, how the Wolves can defend the Clippers backcourt as we get closer to a potential play-in. But just know that if Paul George comes back, this is a team that destroyed the Timberwolves, beat them double digits, 2 of which were 20 or 18 or more point deficits back early in the season. Different Timberwolves team, different Clippers team. I get that. But if Paul George comes back, we're going to have to look back at some of the most painful games of the season so far for the Wolves. Keep that in mind. But I think we should keep an eye on what the Clippers are up to down the stretch of the season, as again, it's still the most likely play-in matchup for the Wolves. Okay, I want to close the show by looking at Wolves-Mavs. We just saw this on Monday, but I want to look at that matchup once again and what the Wolves could potentially do on Friday differently than what they did on Monday. First of all, let's talk about our friends over at NBA Top Shot. They're our title sponsor of today's show. NBA Top Shot is the officially licensed NFT of the NBA. Connect with a community of hundreds of thousands of NBA fans as a natural progression of fantasy sports, a way to upgrade your experience as an NBA fan. This is the future of what being an NBA fan looks like. It's part trading cards. It's akin to the stock market for the NBA. Every day, millions of dollars worth of NFTs are traded back and forth between tens of thousands of NBA fans around the world. It's akin to fantasy sports. There's also an airline loyalty program for NBA fans. Investors in NBA Top Shot include Michael Jordan and Kevin Durant, not to mention Will Smith. There's also a lot of NBA players in the community, such as Tyrese Halliburton, Karl-Anthony, and Harrison Barnes. I hear people ask all the time, why would I buy a highlight when I can watch it on YouTube for free? But it's not just about watching a highlight. It's about having ownership stake in what's akin to a stock market for the NBA's greatest highlights. If you were to tell someone in 1916 that your piece of cardboard with Babe Ruth's face on it would be worth millions one day, everyone would think you're crazy. This is the opening tip-off of a digital age, and the NBA's officially licensed NFT will be a big part of that digital age. Imagine when the NFTs are even mainstream on social media. You'll be able to flex what you own around the world instantly with no binders or shoeboxes required. If you sign up for Top Shot today, the best way to start is by getting yourself a starter pack. You can pull an NFT of a superstar like LeBron or KD, or star rookies like Cade Cunningham or Evan Mobley for $9. And if you didn't pull your favorite player from the starter pack, you can snag moments from the marketplace that appeal to you. Challenges are the best way to earn exclusive moment NFTs rewards. Complete challenges to unlock exclusive moment NFTs. You can treat Top Shot like the best of daily fantasy sports. Top Shot's moments can get you access to events and can be used in fantasy minigames on a regular basis. NBA Top Shot is the future of being an NBA fan. Own officially licensed rare NFTs of the greatest moments from NBA history. Sign up today at lockedon.nbatopshot.com. Again, that's lockedon.nbatopshot.com. Let's also talk about our friends over at Built Bar. This is the time of year that most people have pretty much given up on their New Year's resolutions, but not this year for me. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right, thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not really a resolution, though, because I really do actually enjoy eating Built Bars. I have at least one every single day. Have you tried Built Puffs? If you haven't, you're missing out on one of Built Bar's best tasting bars. Puffs are the first ever protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy, they're marshmallowy, they're not just a protein bar. They're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Puffs are a fan favorite. There's some incredible flavors. They've got yummy cinnamony churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie. They're delicious. They're going to be your new favorite. And all Built Bars, including Puffs, are covered in 100% real chocolate. Go to Built.com. Scroll down to the macros chart. You'll be absolutely blown away. High protein, low calorie, high fiber, low carb. Most Built Bars have just 130 calories and only 4 grams of net sugar and 4 net carbs, plus 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which often has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. At Built Bar, they're all about the taste. They make it taste delicious first and then figure out how to make it healthy. And I don't know how they do it, but they pull it off every single time. Go to Built.com. Use promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, let's close by talking Wolves-Mavs on Friday night. Of course, the Wolves and Mavs just played on, Monday night, I guess. And fantastic game, came down to the wire. If you missed my key takeaways from that one, you can go back and listen to the key takeaways pod that I did that would have posted as Tuesday's podcast, posted late Monday, early Tuesday. And long story short, each team had a really solid plan coming into the game to guard the other team's opposing player. The Mavs were creative in how they wanted to guard Towns. The Timberwolves were creative in somewhat in what they wanted to do with Luka Doncic, and actually did a pretty good job. Each of the teams did a pretty good job guarding the opposing team's best player, and each coach did a really good job at adjusting over the course of the game. The Timberwolves forced Luka Doncic into, what did he have, 8 turnovers, and 6 of them were in the first half, I believe. And down the stretch, they were daring Luka to beat them. They put Anthony Edwards on him for stretches in the game, and he really did step up to the challenge and did a pretty good job. What I was a little surprised the Wolves didn't do more of on Monday was I don't think they played really any zone at all. And the Mavs are, they're they're actually not a very good three-point shooting team. They're a solid offensive team, but their calling card this year, surprisingly, has actually been defense. And they haven't done much offensively, and especially not from outside the arc. As a team, the Mavs are 24th in three-point shooting percentage. And the Wolves, I think, should be forcing the Mavs to do more in regards to shooting the ball from outside the arc. That's the way that the Wolves can beat this Mavs team. And they were daring Luka to beat them from deep. Luka is a little below average three-point shooter, 34-ish%, between 34 and 35%. Which, by the way, Luka sat out Wednesday's game for the Mavs, but he's not currently on the injury report for Friday, so it seems pretty likely he's going to play against the Wolves. Makes sense given the implications. The Wolves are still just a couple games behind the Mavs for the 5 spot in the West. But the Mavs are still going to not have Davis Bertans. Of course, the trade deadline acquisition, no Trey Burke for them. And of course, Tim Hardaway Jr. is still out as well. So Luka will likely play, but the Mavs again are 24th in three-point shooting percentage. Luka himself is just 34.4%. The Mavs as a team are 34.3%. And well, Dallas had a couple of timely makes from outside the arc. Dorian Finney-Smith comes to mind. Jalen Brunson is always difficult for the Timberwolves. Spencer Dinwiddie obviously is playing well in a Mavericks uniform, although he struggled at times against the Wolves on Monday. Those are the guys the Wolves need to look out for on the perimeter. And Luka did a pretty good job of deferring to the Finney-Smiths of the world late in that game as the Wolves were really pressuring the ball when it was in Luka's hands, but also allowing him to shoot from 30 feet because why not? He has the range. But he also shoots, it's like a souped up version of D'Angelo Russell in that regard. Let me be clear. In that regard, both those guys have limitless range. They're both fairly average three-point shooters overall. They're more high volume three-point shooting shooters. And Luka is exactly that. He shoots the ball. He has maybe a little bit more actual range than D'Lo. Shoots the ball just a little bit less or a little bit worse than D'Lo. A little bit more often from three than D'Lo. So in that regard, there's some similarities. The Wolves are happy to let Luka. They'd much rather him be shooting 30-footers than getting downhill and getting to the line. He struggled a little bit at the free throw line this year. He's under 74%, but he still averages 7 free throw attempts per game. And as a team, the Mavs aren't actually that great at getting to the line. They're 19th in free throw rate offensively. 18th in free throw rate offensively. The Wolves remain the league's worst team when it comes to allowing opponents to shoot free throws. So the Wolves would be happy to have Luka shoot more deep threes. They'd be happy to allow more three-point attempts from the Mavs versus Towns getting into foul trouble once again or Jared Vanderbilt getting into foul trouble once again. That will be a key again on Friday night against the Mavs. So expect the Wolves to maybe try some zone to continue to try and force Luka to shoot from deep. They'd rather have that than have him get downhill. And also Anthony Edwards, expect him to take the challenge of guarding Luka in the half court frequently like he did on Monday. I think that's probably the Wolves' best winning strategy is to have a big physical defender on him. With no Jaden McDaniels, obviously, still out with the ankle sprain. He'll be reevaluated next week. By the way, Chris Finch said, I think on Thursday, that he feels like McDaniels might be a little ahead of schedule. Doesn't mean a lot because he hasn't even been officially reevaluated until next Tuesday. It would be 2 weeks from when the Wolves said that initially. But with no Jaden McDaniels, if Edwards is feeling well, I would expect him to be on Luka a little bit more frequently in this game as well. Okay, Wolves-Mavs tonight. Of course, the Wolves, a big weekend as well. They go, this is after the Mavs game on Friday, the Wolves go on a 4-game road trip. And I believe it kicks off in Boston. I'm going to make sure I get that right. After Friday's game. At Boston on Sunday evening. That's a 5 p.m. Central tip. And then at Toronto, at Denver, then at Houston as we get out of this really rough stretch. But still, a 4-game road trip. Nothing to sneeze at. This is a really important game against the Mavs. A very winnable game at home against the Mavs. So we'll see how the Wolves come out of this one and if they can potentially pick up another half game on the Denver Nuggets on Friday night. All right, that's all I have for today here on the show. Thanks once again for listening to Locked On Wolves, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. You can listen to this show anywhere. Thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen, by the way. You can listen to the show on YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you like to listen to podcasts. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CK. Of course, Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And again, thanks for making us your first listen. Now, please make your second listen, Locked On NBA, which is the Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast. We'll catch you next time. Enjoy Wolves-Mavs and have a great weekend.